what must be the most hotly anticipated game on the planet.
Half-Life 3, yes.
3, and Gabe's now going to tell us exactly when that's coming out.
In 2004, the sequel to one of the biggest entertainment franchises of all time was released to universal acclaim. However, due to a complex legal dispute and for fear of getting sued, we can't talk about the rise of Agent Cody Banks 2 today for fear of revealing that on Lucky for him, he said he didn't speak Portuguese. So instead, we're going to turn our attention to a video game, one that drew praise from both fans and critics alike. Today, we're going to be talking about Half-Life 2.
After the success of 1998's Half-Life, Valve Software quickly turned its attention to a sequel, knowing that striking while the iron crowbar was hot, pun intended, would be important to continue momentum. So, after the Opposing Force expansion pack was released, it immediately switched its focus to develop a second and third expansion pack, namely Half-Life Blue Shift and Half-Life Decay. But then, soon after, just 2 years after Decay's release, Half-Life 2 was ready to be leaked onto the internet.
Holy shit.
The anticipation was dialed up to 11, but then finally, Half-Life 2 was officially released to the world.
Dr. Freeman, I presume.
Rise and shine, Mr. Freeman. Rise and shine. Not that I wish to imply you have been sleeping on the job. No one is more deserving of a rest, and all the effort in the world would have gone to waste until, well, let's just say your hour has come again.
The game ushered in a new era in PC gaming with its unique mandatory installation of Valve's Steam platform. Steam would act as both installer and DRM for the newly released game, but with server issues a problem at launch, some players still haven't logged into the game to this day. One initial challenge that Valve's masterpiece faced was that many North American journalists and reviewers struggled with the pronunciation of the letter L in the word half, meaning many people searching for the game were confused and were looking for Half-Life 2. Valve responded by updating the title of the game for later retail copies and on the Steam store too, to remove the L and replace with a second F. The game set new standards in the FP shooter genre, with realistic physics being the driving force behind the game. Visuals were unmatched for the time, and the AI found in the game would not be rivaled for at least another 10 years until the release of Gearbox's Alien Colonial Marines.
The game takes place after the events of Half-Life, but before the events of Half-Life 3, meaning this one is the second chronological entry in the franchise because it took place after the first one, which took place before this.
Assuming the role of Gordon Freeman, the player awakens to find Earth has been invaded by the alien Combine. The superior alien race had taken mere hours to conquer the planet and force a tight police rule over its inhabitants. And by tight, we don't mean it was good, it was strict. Well, we could have just said strict instead of tight. Yep. Okay, it wasn't tight, it was strict. Freeman is inserted into a train arriving in City 17, the home of the Combine Citadel, its base of operations on Earth. Many may ask, if it's their base, then why set it up in City 17? Surely City 1 would have been better, bigger and full of more important people. And to that we say bollocks. Upon its release, the game implemented a bold control scheme that would divide many, confuse some and baffle most. The tried and tested WASD or WASD control scheme had been commonplace for a number of years. However, in their attempt to go against the curve and be innovative, Valve instead opted for the less common WAS semicolon setup. This meant players would be able to walk forwards, backwards and strafe to their left, but if they wished to strafe to their right, they'd have to either take their hands off the keyboard or take their hands off the mouse. For experienced gamers, they could simply move to the left and ignore strafing right at all. leading to many live streams of Half-Life 2 in subsequent years to give people severe motion sickness.
A patch later tried to address the problem. However, it bound the W, A and S keys instead to Control, Alt and Delete. Some said it made the problem worse.
One of the biggest technical marvels within the game was its much-loved gravity gun. The weapon enabled players to pick up things within the world and project them at great speeds towards other objects and enemies. It's since been copied and imitated many times, with notable games such as Dead Space, Bioshock and Dead Space each having their own physics-bending gameplay mechanics, with the former and latter also borrowing the concept of firing saw blades at enemies to cut off their limbs. Jesus, why didn't they just call it Dead Life and call the main character Gordon and make him smash crates with a crowbar and be done with it? The game received high praise upon its release. IGN's Dan Adams wrote at the time, "There's just so much to say. Half-Life 2 is, simply put, the best single-player shooter ever released for the Puck. Many would agree, some would not, others wouldn't care. However, critics love to be critical." Jim Rosignol, writing for PC Gamer at the time, highlighted a major flaw in the game, saying, "Both sprinting and flashlight use are linked to a recharging energy bank. It's nevertheless a little peculiar." This was most likely the reason that when Rosignol became a games developer himself years later, his game, Sir You Are Being Hunted, featured a flashlight that never ran out of batteries. His survival game, featuring robots dressed as Victorian-era gentlemen, was of course far less peculiar. While GameSpot's Jason Ocampo wrote, "Surprisingly, Half-Life 2's story is one of the most disappointing aspects of the game. The first half of the game feels a bit unfocused, while the second half seems rushed. Even worse, the story leaves behind a mess of unanswered questions, and it doesn't touch on any of the lingering questions left over from the first game." Ocampo went on to score the game with a lowly 9.2 out of 10. 18 months after the main game, Half-Life 2 Episode 1 was released to pick up the story just after the events of Half-Life 2. This saw Alex and Gordon again shooting things while running around. The following year, Half-Life 2 Episode 2 Attack of the Clones was released. This again featured running, shooting, walking, shooting, puzzles, shooting, and, new to Episode 2, shooting. Both Episode 1 and 2 were received favourably, except for places where they were not.
Episode 3 was released in 2005 and concluded the journey of Anakin Skywalker becoming Darth Vader. However, that was the third in the Star Wars prequel trilogy and had nothing to do with Half-Life at all.
Reflecting upon the franchise in a 2017 Ready AMA, Valve co-founder Gabe Newell said of Half-Life that they were not the best single-player games from Valve, but instead selected Portal 2. "The issue with Half-Life for me is that I was involved in a much higher percentage of the decisions about the game, so it's hard for me to look at them as anything other than a series of things I regret." As with any creative project, it's easy to linger on the compromises that are made and worry of their impact on the end result. In creating this video for your entertainment, for example, many concepts and ideas will not make the final cut, such as the 30-minute depiction of Half-Life 2 via the medium of dance that I wrote, directed, choreographed and performed. The fanbase for these games and their episodic follow-ups has grown over the years as more gamers discover them, but have also shrunk slightly because people probably would have died. A true sequel to Half-Life 2 was never announced. Whatever the future holds for the Half-Life franchise, one thing will remain: the legacy created by its two mainline titles.
A VR title was released in 2020 and followed the second game supporting cast member Alex as she did some stuff in a place, but this time it was in VR and had the unique functionality that you look like a while playing it. With the release of Half-Life Alyx, we're perhaps further than ever away from getting a third game in the series. Half-Life 3 might never actually come at all, but one thing's for certain: nobody can ever take away the legacy of that amazing first-person shooter from 2004, Halo 2. And Half-Life 2's not bad either. We'll see you again.